Hey everyone, I'm David and this is what I'm thinking. In my previous video, I unboxed the 50th anniversary edition of Abbey Road by the Beatles. Now I'm going to do a review of the content of this package. Abbey Road has for years been maybe my favorite album by the Beatles. I love the songs, I love the quality of the musicianship, I love the sound of the album. When I was growing up, more times than I could count, I would sit down in my parents' lazy boy in the living room, and I'd put on my dad's CD of Abbey Road. And I'd imagine the Beatles putting on a concert right in front of me in the living room. The Beatles, having honed their skills together over several weeks during the Let It Be sessions, were a really, really good band at this point. And when they went to George Martin and said, "We want you to produce another album for us," and he said, "Okay, but only if you let me actually produce it the way we used to." They put together this album, a collection of different songs from all four of the Beatles, because Ringo got in on the action too. They put together a lot of these tracks in the studio, playing live together. And this album really showcases the musicianship the Beatles had. Ringo's drumming is absolutely brilliant on this album. George's lead guitar is as tasty as it has ever been. John adds some incredible rhythm work, and then there's Paul, who is all over the place. He plays guitar, he plays bass, he plays piano, and he has some absolutely monumental vocals, and of course he contributes a lot of great songwriting as well. George has two of his best songs on this album, and John Lennon manages to do what John Lennon could do better than anyone else, which was write a song like Come Together, which he admitted is pretty much nonsense. And yet that may be the single best recording, not necessarily the best song, but the single best recording that the Beatles ever did. Ringo is just all over the place on the drums. He's moving so smoothly. There's a real punch to the way he's using the toms. George is just really fluid on the guitar. Paul's bass is as funky as it's ever been. And then there's John giving this amazing lead vocal, adding all sorts of depth to a meaningless lyric. And it's brilliant. What I love about Come Together is what the Beatles don't do. They don't overload the track. They don't make it too heavy. There's a lot of space in this recording. What's important is what isn't there. Probably the most popular cover of this song is the one that Aerosmith did. Now, Aerosmith's a great band. Aerosmith wrote some great music. And Aerosmith has some legendary rock songs. But for me, Aerosmith's approach to Come Together is all wrong. It's too heavy, it's too bombastic, it's too in your face. The restraint that the Beatles managed to show on their recording is what makes the song work. It's perfect. I have no other way to describe it. Come Together is a perfect recording. And that's followed up by Something, one of George's best songs, the song that finally got him in the #1 spot on the chart as a songwriter. Something is, again, a fantastic performance, some of George's best guitar playing, and some amazing production by George Martin. There's very subtle strings in the background, and an unsung hero of that recording is Billy Preston, who was part of the Get Back sessions. Billy Preston came back into the studio and contributed on 2 of the songs on this album, Something and I Want You, She's So Heavy. And the organ playing that Billy Preston does on Something is a real big part of what makes the song sound as smooth and romantic as it does. He really deserves more credit for the work that he did with the Beatles. That's followed up by Maxwell's Silver Hammer. Probably the song that seems most out of place on the album. One of the things that I never really picked up on before was that on Maxwell's Silver Hammer, that's George playing the bass, not Paul. And he is as fluid and natural on it. It sounds like Paul McCartney playing the bass, and it's George. That's probably about the best compliment you could give right there. That's followed up by Oh Darling, which also has George on the bass, Paul's playing piano, John's playing the guitar part, and it's amazing, amazing lead vocal by Paul McCartney. That's followed up by Ringo's contribution to the album, Octopus's Garden, which is an absolutely sublime song. It's easy to write it off as, oh, it's a kid's song. It's sort of like a sequel to Yellow Submarine. It's about living under the water. But really, it's a well-written song. George Harrison again comes through with some amazingly fluid guitar parts. I think George and Ringo had a special bond. They were the only people in the world who understood what it was to be a Beatle, but also understood what it was to not be John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Ringo definitely holds his own with this one. That's followed by I Want You, She's So Heavy, by John. An amazing vocal by John, who offers some really, really fine lead guitar playing, doubling his own vocal, mixed with the interjections of guitar from George. It's a tremendous performance. Great bass playing by Paul, and again, another great organ track by Billy Preston. And in fact, on one of the bonus CDs in this package, you can hear the final 3.5, 4 minutes or so of this song with organ improv by Billy Preston that was eliminated from the final mix. And you can hear how the track plays all the way until the time the Beatles actually stopped playing, as opposed to the sudden cut that ends side 1 of the album. The second part of the album opens with what is probably my favorite Beatles song, Here Comes the Sun by George. Fantastic guitar work. It never fails to make me smile when I hear it. When I was in graduate school at the University of New Mexico, November 2001, got up one morning to go to my classes at the university, and they were playing a Beatles song. I forget which one, but they were playing a Beatles song, which was normal. And then they followed that up with another Beatles song, and then another one. And I began to think, maybe something happened. And then the announcer came in and said that they were honoring George Harrison, who had just passed away. And the next song they played was Here Comes the Sun. And I almost had to pull the car off to the side of the road because my eyes were starting to water. I'd always loved the song, but it has a little bit of a different meaning for me after that. But what can I say? I love it. It's maybe my favorite song ever. Thanks, George. That's followed up with Because. Beautiful piece of work by John. With a little help from Yoko Ono playing Beethoven that inspired him. It has George Martin on the keyboard, and in fact, another track on the bonus CDs lets us hear the basic track with Ringo clapping his hands in order to keep time. even though you don't hear him on the final mix, he's contributing to the band staying together, steady like a machine. Majestic three-part harmony from John, Paul, and George, overdubbed 3 times to give it a really full sound. It's such a beautiful blend of vocal. It's understandable why the Love mashup project that they did with Cirque du Soleil opens with the unaccompanied vocal track of this song. It's really a testament to what the Beatles could do when they sang together. Followed up by The Long One, as it's called. You Never Give Me Your Money, Sun King, which has some gorgeous guitar interplay between John and George. Mean Mr. Mustard and Polythene Pam. Yeah. Another journey into the strange, bizarre world of John Lennon land. And Paul's She Came In Through the Bathroom Window. Props to Paul for taking a title like that and making it flow in a song. Not many people could pull that off. The beautiful Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight, which has Paul and Ringo doing the chorus together. And then, of course, the end. It showcases Ringo's drumming, the guitar soloing of Paul, George, and John, and that great majestic ending with an orchestra from George Martin. And of course there's Her Majesty, because the Beatles couldn't end anything normally. The mix. George Martin's son, Giles Martin, and his assistant Sam Oakell put together this new mix of the album. You really do feel like the Beatles are in the room with you. Now, I don't have a Dolby Atmos system, so I can't really give you a clear picture of the Dolby Atmos mix of the album, but the surround sound mix sounds amazing. It sounds like it was recorded yesterday. And for an album that is celebrating its 50th anniversary, that's quite an accomplishment. It's a testament to the quality of the work that they did in making the recording as good as it was in the first place. And Giles Martin and Sam Oakell managed to take that raw material and pull out as much sound as they could. The surround sound mix mostly plays across the front. The rear channels are largely atmosphere, you could say. Although sometimes the organ or the rhythm guitar or the backing vocals tend to come more from behind you than in front of you. Lead vocals typically are centered in the mix. It really comes through when the orchestra or the synthesizer are employed. This was the only Beatles album that used real synthesizer effects. It was a pretty new instrument. George brought in his Moog synthesizer, and they used it on Maxwell Silver Hammer. They used it on Here Comes the Sun, Because, and it's sprinkled throughout the album, but never so much that it becomes the dominant instrument. It's used to color the sound, but they avoided the temptation to make it a very synth-heavy sound, like a lot of people might have been tempted to do in a similar situation. When the strings come in on something, it feels like you're being wrapped in them, like a warm blanket. It's an incredibly massive yet understated sound, if that makes any sense. There are some things certainly that maybe could have been done differently. A lot of mixers might have been tempted to bounce the sound around a bit to really pull out the surround effect, sort of like early 3D movies, they would have people jumping out at the camera and really exaggerating the movement in front of the audience in order to really play up the 3D effect. It's easy to see how that would have been a temptation to do that with this material, but largely it's a lot more restrained so that it gives you a sense of being in the middle of the sound picture, but not so much that it calls attention to you're using surround sound. The material on Abbey Road maybe doesn't lend itself quite as much to the use of rear channel effects the way that Sgt. Pepper or the White Album do. But that's okay. It sounds fantastic. It's fun listening to the 2 bonus CDs that let you hear some alternate takes, some different mixes, and let you hear a little bit more about what it sounded like when they were putting this together in the studio. Also, one of the tracks on the bonus CDs allows you to hear the long one as it was originally put together, with Her Majesty sandwiched in between Mean Mr. Mustard and Polythene Pam. I think they made the right decision to remove it from the medley. It just doesn't quite fit, but it's fun to hear the way it was originally put together, and gives you a better picture on why it starts with that big guitar chord at the beginning and ends unresolved. It's kind of a funny thing about Abbey Road, how both side 1 with I Want You, She's So Heavy, and Her Majesty, they both end with a sudden cut before the song's actually finished. Possibly my favorite album and a worthy 50th anniversary tribute. The Beatles, Abbey Road.